We know what kind of works, we get best practices, lessons learned globally, but then we get to drill down to local on what they need.
Good morning, hello, and welcome to Where Strategy Meets Design, a business leadership podcast by Paperspace, where we explore how innovative workplace design can transform business challenges into opportunities. I'm Narita Chia, your host and CEO of Paperspace Asia. Today, I'm so thrilled to welcome Emily Hake, Project Executive in Google's Real Estate and Workplace Services team. Emily manages workplace projects across India, South Korea, Japan, and pretty much anywhere across Asia, and where her main role is to transform data-driven insights into spaces that help Google employees thrive in an ever-changing world. We've been friends for a long time, years since she stepped off the plane from San Francisco, and I've always admired how she balances technical expertise with genuine concern for human experience in the workplace. Today, we'll explore how inclusive workplace design isn't just about accommodating differences, it's a strategic business advantage. Thank you, Emily, for joining us here today. Let's start by having us hear a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's always good to spend time with you. I have been in workplace for 20 years. I started as a little baby coordinator doing invoices, moved up through project management and now portfolio management at Google. So I've had a lot of opportunity to learn from the ground up and also see how workplace has changed, and especially in design, accommodations, accessibility, and inclusion as well.
So we start off by, in the years that I've known you, Emily, what I find really particularly fascinating is your commitment to creating workplaces that build culture, productivity, sense of belonging for employees. And I once read that you have this mantra about thinking globally, acting locally mindset when it comes to the office experience. Perhaps you could just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. So as you know, Google has a very big portfolio. And so as a basis, we have a lot of metrics that we fit. How much of the space is for desks, how much of the space is for meetings, events, etc. So that's kind of the basis of our metrics on how we make sure people can be productive in the office. But then outside of that, and that's a standard across the globe, outside of that though, I also have the opportunity to engage actual users in the workplace. We have a lot of volunteers who are very passionate about their workspace. So that's where I get the opportunity then, outside of the standard metrics that we do everywhere, then I get the opportunity to speak to people in each of these different countries on how they actually work and what they actually need to be productive. And I think that that's where I've somewhat twisted the think globally, act locally concept. Is we know what kind of works, we get best practices, lessons learned globally, but then we get to drill down to local on what they need. For example, in Japan, people are very conscientious at their desk. They don't want to take a phone call at their desk, even though in the past we all had phones and we all talked all the time. So it's very important to have a lot of space away from the desk where people can feel comfortable being loud and step away and not worry about bothering their peers. But then you go to India where people like to be together more. There's a little bit more camaraderie. They're able to share experiences through talking on the phone or taking meetings at their desks because they're able to then learn from each other there or know what's going on in other projects or situations that they're working in. So the meeting rooms are bigger because people like to gather more, and there's less of the smaller phone booths because people are not as concerned with disturbing their desk partners or desk neighbors. So there's a little bit of nuance there on how people act differently in different locations. And even though we have the same number of desks and the same number of meeting rooms for our metrics, we arrange them separately in different places.
That's so interesting, Emily. So, could you talk us through a little bit about the process where, when you start a project and say you've been shipped to Japan to do this project, and these are obviously things that you've discovered along the way, what's that process then to understand these nuances to then be informed how you kind of use the global directive and sort of twist it to suit people's behaviors?
So we do a lot of workshops and visioning. So initially start at the top with our site leads or our management teams to understand what their goals are for their teams. Do they want to collaborate more? Do they need more focus and head down space because they're going to have a lot of projects coming up? Management doesn't always know
what's happening on
the ground and what people are saying to their neighbor at the desk or who they actually need to work with.
Right.
Because we've learned people, you have a team of 40, you're not talking to 39 people every day in that team, no matter what. So really understanding from them who they speak to, how they speak to each other, and what they need to do that. And then from there, kind of really test out what their journey is like throughout the day, what they need to do throughout the day, and arrange accordingly through there. And then also report back up. Sometimes we tell things to management and leadership that they didn't even know, and it helps them as well to manage their teams.
I think what you're starting to kind of segue into that even within the context of so many things that's the same for Google, there's still not one size fits all.
Right.
It's fantastic. And to kind of maybe segue into the next question, which is how then what's that approach that you take to encourage employees to provide feedback in the work environment? How do you balance, right, accommodating so many needs and wants and yet still maintaining the cohesiveness of a place that, still embraces the brand experience?
Yeah, it's hard. It's through prioritization for sure on kind of what we find out is important to the teams. The encouragement to provide feedback was your first point, and I kind of got lost along the way thinking about prioritization. But how to encourage the feedback is actually the feedback loop, because you could ask for feedback all you want, but if you never prove or never do it or never tell people, then they don't trust that their feedback goes anywhere.
Right.
That's how I think we do a really good job. And what I encourage my project teams to do is really answer point by point on that feedback.
Right.
Some of it we can't do. We can't put in a hot tub. We can't put in a shark tank, but we still answer why we can't put in a hot tub. It's expensive to run it. We can't feed the sharks every day. But that's how you build that trust, so that when they do give feedback and we say, that is a good idea, I never thought of that.
Right.
That's something that never would have occurred to me. Let's do it and put it in. So we build the trust that way, and that's how we continue to get feedback.
Right.
Even when sometimes it's hard to hear. I don't like the color of that chair, but we have an answer to that too.
Right. So maybe, Emily, if you could share maybe one example where you've taken a feedback and you've implemented it and you felt that it's sort of really impacted the person or a group of people, either deliberately or, just a byproduct. Could you share maybe an example?
Yeah. So I've been running a program across North Asia for the past 2 years to increase accessibility and inclusion in the workplace. Again, as we were talking earlier, accessibility isn't just about the physical space. It's also not just how wide the corridors are, but also how people move through the space and what they need to do in the space. And that's what that inclusive is really all about. Especially after COVID, where people went home and they found out, oh, I work really well in this situation where my desk is like this, or I don't have people right next to me. And so when coming back to the office, all of a sudden it was very loud, and they discovered, oh, I really do need these spaces for downturn. So we found that out through talking to people, and we've built several spaces that are away from the chatter, away from the buzz, that people can control like they did at home, so that they can still feel comfortable. So I think that was a really interesting learn that we never would have had, because also people didn't know that they had that choice before. Similar, we were working in a project in Japan, and we had a wheelchair user that is not a standard wheelchair. So all the heights that we have in our codes doesn't really matter, because that's not her standard. So we put in a height adjustable table in the cafe, which I had never seen before and I never thought of. And the day we put it in, we got an email from her thanking us because she could eat her hot food comfortably for the first time ever. And she didn't even really think that she could ask for that as well, because she didn't even really know that that was a possibility. And so now that's something in all of my projects. I will always have a height adjustable table in the cafe, but I don't even see them in restaurants either, you know. So that was a big impact to me on a very small thing. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't an accommodation that affected anybody else, but you know, made at least one person feel more comfortable in their workspace that day. So
That's a beautiful story. It's like we assume things are just there for everyone who's not us, you know, and even the person who, you know, probably had to eat hot food like, you know, 2 feet away, you know, didn't even realize that that was something that she could have. And I think that's amazing that if you could impact like the small things that way, right? And it feels, I would imagine, to the person, oh, they thought about me. And isn't that what really matters?
right.
Yeah. Thanks, Em. And sort of circling back into your experience working across different markets and scales, what are some of the tried and true ways that you have created more inclusive workplaces and you've seen the impact lives?
Listening sessions. It's really just listening to people.
Mm.
And you don't have to promise anything, but really listening. Also, we have found that having what we call design committees or future space committees, things like that, and having people have some ownership.
Mm.
You know, obviously, you can't run a project with 100 stakeholders; it'll never get done. But having a few people that feel some ownership around some of the decisions you're making,
Mm.
then that also spreads into the rest of the culture, because they are also say, "Look what I did. Oh, this was my idea," or things like that. So I think that also builds on the culture and lets people know that we're not putting the office on them.
Right.
They're contributing to the office, which then builds a more cohesive culture around community and things like that.
I think that makes so much sense. I think so often there's a team that builds these spaces and they think it's amazing because they spent all those hours developing it. But, you know, you're sort of informed the project's going to happen and, you know, hey, it's ready. Hey, let's move in. But there's sort of like, you know, nothing quite in the middle. And I think what you're trying to say is if you're building it for a group of people with a specific kind of need, and obviously you kind of have to circumvent the yes and the no's based on the priorities. And if they were part of that process, perhaps the articulation of what it means for them, right, becomes so much more consistent. There's a lot more banter. And even if you didn't like being told no, at least there was a conversation around it, right?
Yeah, I think also in workplace and real estate, sometimes people, when I tell people I work for Google, they think, "Oh, are you a software engineer?" I say, "No, real estate." They're like, "Real estate?" People forget that somebody has to build the offices, right? So I also think people are not very educated around it, and they don't really understand why we do the things we do. And that's another thing that having these design committees and then also communications out about the status of projects is not just about like, oh, look at all the nice things we're doing, but also educating people about why we've made certain design decisions or whatnot. And then that really helps people feel comfortable that they're, again, like you said, being thought of and not just being warehoused in a big building. And that makes, again, continues to build the community and the culture as well.
That's beautiful. And I wanted to just maybe sort of close with the last question, you know, just around, I think everyone's kind of, perhaps lots of organizations are still waiting for like the silver bullet. What's the right number of days? What's the right composition of space? do I do this? Is it going to be right? If I do that, is it going to be wrong? And kind of waiting for like that golden nugget of truth. And what would be your advice to teams and leaders trying to navigate what next, or versus not doing anything?
Yeah, I'm still navigating that myself. In 20 years, haven't found the perfect anything. But I think we were talking earlier about universal design and how when you design for everybody wins. I think it's somewhat similar there. I don't think do nothing is the choice, but if you're designing flexibly, I think that that's the only way you can continue moving forward. You design flexibly, try it out, and if things don't work,
be ready to change it.
Change it, yeah. And again, listen to the feedback and make the actions that make sense. When you move into a space, no matter how well you design it, there's always going to be something you didn't think about because you're not moving through the space. You're looking at the space on a piece of paper.
That makes sense.
So I think designing flexibly, thinking that you will change things and being okay with being able to change things in a couple months if you need to.
It's almost like planning for the unplanned, really. And when it comes, don't get frustrated about it. Just sort of understand what's driving that and what can we do with the parts that we have and make that work rather than, well, it's done.
Yeah, that is a motto at Google. I think people sometimes think, oh, Google has a lot of money, they can spend whatever we want. But we have shareholders and we are trying to be frugal all the time and do what we need to do and be scrappy. Use what we have to make things work. And we do it in our homes as well all the time. We don't always go out and buy a new thing. I sometimes use a stool as a coffee table. It's there.
Yeah. So I like this idea of being scrappy because sometimes we had this conversation with another client yesterday, and I said sometimes, designing to be scrappy also kind of evokes a certain kind of behavior rather than everything being sort of finished, polished, because maybe in that it feels like it's quite definitive. And maybe if it's a bit scrappy, then you're sort of prepared to be like, oh, I could try this or I could try that, and I'm not going to wreck anything.
It's problem solving.
Exactly.
As well. And that's what every company needs is people who see a problem and don't lament that it's a problem. They look at how to fix it with what they have. And
absolutely. So and sometimes the resources just around you, and it's just a bit of a mindset to say, what do we have? What can we do about it? Yeah. Oh, thank you, Emily. Thank you for sharing such thoughtful insights today. Our conversation reminded me that the heart of every successful workplace design really comes down to the human experience, the connections we forge, the belonging we feel, and the communities that we build together within these spaces. So how can we have these projects without those conversations?
Absolutely.
And so with that, we want to thank you again for being here with us today, sharing your valuable insights and reminding us all that the most impactful workplaces are those designed with empathy and understanding. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us again on Where Strategy Meets Design.